Bible only. Why Bible, baby, why Bible, baby. Если нам скажут, ваш поезд ушел, мы ответим просто, что подождем другой. И чтоб на перроне скучать не пришлось, мы накроем стол и выпьем за любовь, и будет хорошо. Все будет хорошо, все будет хорошо, я это знаю, знаю. Хорошо, все будет хорошо, мы чувствуем.
She has also a lot of groups in Paris, including Joie de Paris at Travel Addicts Group. And Carol, and you can introduce, hear you. So, okay, yes. So we are gonna start with Maria. Yeah, she's a consul in the Moscow travel group. And after that, we are having Lesley presenting Moscow. And Lesley is also a consul in the Global Personal Development Group. And she can share with us the other groups she has in Moscow. So, Maria, I think you can get started. Introduce Dmitry, that is also your guest speaker.
Thank you so much, Lucy, and thank you, Carolina, for hosting this fantastic talk. It's really taking me by surprise, and I was really surprised how difficult it is to create such a presentation about my own country. I run Internationals Group, Moscow Travel Club, for around 10 years. And I travel a lot with a lot of people. So for me, I wanted to make a small presentation about my country, share with you some interesting facts. And I also invited a very good expert, Dmitry Alyoshkin, travel expert, to come in and give us a little bit of insight about Russia from his perspective, because he is a real travel expert. And the title of our event is Russia, the Land of Contrasts. So that served me as a guiding point for me to create my presentation today. So let me share my screen with you. Okay, so it's a brief agenda, general information, interesting facts, Crimea and Yamal by Dmitry Alyoshkin, our travel expert. Then, of course, Lesley's 2 months presentation that I'm looking forward to. And then, of course, other questions and answer session at the end. So, Russia. How Russia is different for every person. Every person has a different, their own special relationship with this country, because obviously it's such a diverse country and very lot of contrasts in our country. So when you think about Russia, what comes to your mind? Immediately, a lot of images appear in your mind. But for me, what was important to realize that I can give you something more than just Google information. And of course, an open question for everybody is Russian soul. It's a question that nobody can really answer, including ourselves, our Russian people. So Churchill said famously, it's a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma in 1939. And the Russian soul attracts a lot of attention. So when I wanted to put a picture around to visualize Russian soul, I used this picture here. It's Boris Kustodiev, Maslenitsa, 1999. It's a picture of a provincial town celebrating Maslenitsa, which means in Russian Mardi Gras. It's a celebration 1 week before Lent, the only pagan celebration left in the Russian Orthodox Church. Here on this picture, you can see how festive activities really represent the Russian nature, because we are very festive people. We like to party, we like to gather together. And that's a very beautiful event that happens in spring, to get together and celebrate. You can see a team of horses in the middle here. It's used to be used a lot because the Russian roads were always very sometimes non-existent, and because of the large territory, we used to use this threesome for getting around towns, and because of the forces at the time. So, another interesting picture comes immediately to my mind to portray the Russian soul is this one. This picture is also a threesome, but a different one. It's called Troika by Vasily Perov. That's the picture of 1866. It's displayed in Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow. That's children in the middle of winter carrying a barrel of water. You can see icicles around the barrel of water, representing also our suffering and social inequality, and suffering in general has a very big, huge space in the Russian soul. Okay, now Russia, of course, when I ask my friends, guys, how do you see Russia? What can I tell international community about Russia? What is Russia for you? Everyone, the first thing that they told me, oh, Maria, we're 1/9 of the fucking world. We are the biggest country in the world. You know, you have to say this. You cannot ignore this. And I said, well, is that really important? Yes, we have to say this. So I have to say this to you guys. We are the largest country in the world, 11 time zones, 17,13030 whatever square meters of kilometers land. The Trans-Siberian Railway crosses 8 time zones and goes around 86 cities and towns and crosses 16 rivers, including the Volga. So here you can see that, of course, the famous Trans-Siberian Railway it's fantastic. It's part of the Guinness World Record, and I highly recommend you to try and visit and take this road. And you can see the Troika is still being used. Actually, it's a symbol of Russia. Equally, such you can think of other symbols that are like balalaika and other symbols and matryoshka dolls. Troika is also a symbol of Russia, and it's still used in rural areas. We can find troikas. Next slide: Russia, land of contrasts. Well, we are very, very diverse ethnically as well. 190 ethnic groups and different nationalities. Here's a breakdown, mostly Russians, but also Tatars, Ukrainians, you name it. We have it all. 190 different nationalities and ethnic groups. This is the little map for you to see, to locate Russia. We have a very large borderline with different oceans, Pacific Ocean on the right, and then Arctic Ocean in the north. Border with Finland, very large, long border with Finland, with the European Union. And of course, Russia is half Asia and half Europe. It's a transcontinental land, and we are Eurasian people. 70% were Asian, and 23%, 77 were Asian, 23% were European. And here you can see this line. That's the border, and this line is divides us between Europe and Asia with Ural Mountains. Russia, the land of contrast. Why? Well, because really we have a lot of extremes. It's represented in our nature. For example, deepest freshwater Lake Baikal. 20% of all Earth freshwater reservoir is located in Lake Baikal. Very deep lake. You can drink the water from the lake, no problem. That's the picture during the summertime. And of course, there's a lot of beautiful pictures during the winter time. I highly recommend you to visit as well. And of course, it's a jewel that belongs to the world, and it's absolutely a gorgeous place. Now, another beautiful another area to visit is the famous Caucasian mountain chain, Caucasian Mountains. Highest mountain peak in Europe, Mount Elbrus, 5,642 meters. Here you can see a picture of the actual mountain, and you can also see some people climbing. We are organizing together with Munich Travel Club a trip there, so you can join next year. These guys are not us, but soon we will be also climbing. St. Petersburg. I have a small video to show you the beautiful excursion of St. Petersburg, because St. Petersburg is considered as the second capital of Russia, cultural capital. And St. Petersburg, we can talk about St. Petersburg for hours. But you know, I want to just tell you that it's a northern Venice, Venice of the north, just like Bruges and other northern towns of Europe, Hamburg, for instance. St. Petersburg is part of this squad. It's part of this, towns called Venice of the North. But we have a little bit more bridges than Venice. We have 3 times more bridges than Venice. And it's actually 1,000 bridges, more than 1,000 bridges. And this is a beautiful photo and of the river Neva. and you can observe the sunset, and absolutely gorgeous over the Baltic Sea. It's absolutely gorgeous. Now, Russia is famous for its churches, but I will not focus on the churches too much. Just here's a picture of a small small town called Suzdal, and has 53 churches. Despite such a small size, it's only 15 square kilometers. It's absolutely beautiful as well. The domes are very famous, Russian golden domes of the churches. Then contrast very well with the local rural houses. Now, this is the building of St. Petersburg, the museum. Just a quick fact for you is 2 minutes looking at the exhibit in Hermitage. It would take you 6 years to see everything. So this is the Hermitage Museum, and it's one of the hugest museums in the world. You can imagine, yes, I've been there twice with as a school trip, and I have to tell you, you can go back and back and back, and you will not finish viewing everything in this museum. It's a gorgeous one, and of course, you're aware that the world painters are all paintings are exhibited there. We have, just because a lot of Spanish speakers here, and I just wanted to show you one example of how we collaborated in the past in the cultural sense with Europe. So here you can see that Pablo Picasso did costume designs for Sergei Diaghilev in 1917, and they collaborated and created a lot of interesting things together. And you can find paintings by Picasso in Hermitage Museum. Ballet. Quickly ballet, Russian women, you know, they're very famous. Some of them are ballerinas, and this is one of the beautiful ballerinas, prima ballerinas, Ekaterina Maximova. She was the pupil of Galina Ulanova, and her way of staying, you know, loyal to Russian culture and demonstrating the artistic talent was to be fit and look good even until she was 60. And so her formula of looking good was forget about the pain. So she was propagating this strong Russian mentality of you can achieve anything that you want if you persevere and you forget pain and just focus. So of course we are famous for our ballet and our ballerinas. Now, Russia is the land of contrast. Crazy driving. I'm sure you heard of crazy driving, and Russians, they do really drive sometimes absolutely crazy. And this is just a photo for you. You can see a lot of videos on YouTube how the Russian people drive. And I found one little video for you just to amuse you. Watch. Yeah, that's a tank. It's a real tank, guys. Sometimes you can see tanks. Russian men now lately are in IT. So you can see, for instance, Vitalik Buterin. He's the world's youngest crypto billionaire, founder of Ethereum, a single platform with its own programming language in which any app could be written. Anyway, he's in Canada, but he's Russian origin. He was born in a small town, Kolomna. Modest person, now a famous millionaire. So good luck. And we are glad to export this type of people and share them with the whole world. Thank you for your attention. Please ask questions carefully. That was for the end. Now I would like to check if my expert Dmitry is with us. And if he's with us, then he will present to you two wonderful regions. One is Crimea and another one is Yamal. So Dmitry, are you here?
Hello, everybody. So I want to say hello from Crimea. It's a new part of Russia that was joined to Russia in 2014. So we do traveling around the peninsula right now. So normally we do it for 3-4 days by car and hiking as well. So this land, so if you compare this land with other regions of Russia, it's composition of everything. So nature, history, archaeology, ethnics, cuisine. So for one day, you can visit 4 or 5 different locations, including mountains, cave towns that is about 2,000 years old. Then you can go to antique polis like Khersones, that is a participant for Unesco list. So the biggest town of Greek colonial time in the south of Russia. So other time, in just in 30-40 minutes you can go to mountains, and you can go for a walk for 1 to 3 hours in real wood, about like sort of real wild nature. So as I told before, so the main idea of this peninsula is that you compare and you combine two attractions, nature and history. So it's almost like Italy or Greece. So there are a lot of sea, a lot of beaches, a lot of mountains. At the same time, in each harbor, you can find all settlements of Greek time, of Italian time, of Guinean people who lived here about 500 years ago. And if you go from mountains, you can go to the north. It's a steep area, and this is the place. This is a place where Crimean Tatars lived and still living in Crimea. They have their own capital that calls Bakhchisarai. There's a sort of palace, not Hermitage like in St. Petersburg, but it's a real palace of local king that ruled here 200 years ago. And it's quite interesting that local troops, they attacked Moscow, making some sort of military riding from Crimea to Moscow. So 1,500 kilometers by horses. And the last war of this type, it was about 300 years ago. They reached Moscow, making fire and capital and so on. So, so the main point for Crimea is you can, for 50, 60 kilometers, you have 4 or 5 different locations, including nature, history, and archaeology that starts here about 3,500 years ago. So it's an ancient civilization that ancient Greek they found here. They took start in 15th century BC. So it's quite easy to enter. You need no permission. You need nothing to get in. So you can take a flight from Moscow, from any other city of Russia. You can take a car and cross the Kerch Strait, probably that separate mainland Russia from Crimea by a new bridge. Or you can take a train from Moscow, St. Petersburg. You need no authorization or anything else just to get in. Just buy a ticket and you're in. So it's quite difficult to make a reservation on booking.com because it's not so it's sort of restrictions and sanctions for Crimea. But if you show that you are going here for work, for business, you can find any hotel on booking.com in Crimea as well. So it's quite easy. So it's sort of sanctions, but they don't work here.
Yeah, Dmitry, fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions about this region a bit later. What about what about Yamal? Because
this is the next area. It's the next area where I'm going to in the end of June, and we were there in January as well. It's a polar area of Russia. It's sort of it's sort of 3 hours flight from Moscow to polar area, and this is the land of nomads. This is the land of reindeer nomads. They still live traditional life, living and sort of tipos, and doing all their life, looking for wood, looking for water, and working with the reindeers in the north. Each family has about 4 children and about 1,000 reindeers. In winter, they live in one area, and in springtime, they start moving towards the west, following the winter. They need ice and snow for keeping reindeers out of mosquitoes. So where there's snow, there's no mosquitoes. So, and these people live like half of the year, they live in semi-forest area. Next half of the year in summertime, they are moving to North Ocean, to North Ice Ocean. So there is no transportation. In wintertime, they use snowmobiles because there are no roads, nothing. To get into this area, you need to go to Salihard by plane, or you can take a train. The railroad was built in Gulag time, in Stalin time, because there's no surface for roads, for railroads. It was built by work of many and many thousand people, of prisoners. And but around the Yamal Peninsula, the territory of Yamal is about twice larger than France. So just imagine you have a territory double bigger than France with population about 10,000 people. No, just that's it. You can stay with one family in nowhere. If you want to visit another family, you have to go for 100 kilometers to visit them. In winter, you take a snowmobile to get it. But in summertime, all transportation is restricted by swamp area, by rivers, by mountains. So you stay quite isolated until the autumn comes and the snow falls and the ice covers the rivers. So when it goes, you can move. These people still use national dresses, national coats, national hats, national boots. They work with the reindeers as their fathers and grandfathers did in last century. At the same time, they use techniques. They use technologies of snowmobile, the solar panels and accumulators for electricity. They have mobile phones, they have satellite phones, and they have very strong support from government for each newborn member of community. They get good support from state, and they use it for buying new reindeers, for making their breeds bigger and bigger. So to travel there are three options. You can go there in winter, traveling there by snowmobiles if you have any connections with local people. Then another option, you can rent a helicopter, but it's very expensive. So to get from one tribe to another, you need a helicopter because you can't walk on swamp area. Or the third option is to raft. You find a big river that starts from any modern town like Salihard. Then you take a raft, a boat, and then you go down along the river. And you can, if you go about for 300 kilometers until the North Ocean, you can find 3 or 4 places where they spend summertime, and you can stay with them. They always invite people to get in to be a guest in their places. The main thing is not allowed unofficially is to consume alcohol with them, because it's not good. It's not good for them, and and the behavior after drinking, it changes dramatically. So that's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna do in the end of June. We're gonna fly to Salihard, to the capital of Yamal. We take our rafts with us, and then we go down rafting up to the North Ocean. We're gonna spend there about 10 days. At the same time, this area is the easternmost point of Europe. You know, the westernmost is Portugal, the southernmost is Spain, the northernmost is Norway. The easternmost point of Europe is a part of the land. The part of the world is in Yamal. It's there.
Thank you so much. So interesting. Sadly, we don't have any photos, but when you look on the photos, you will realize it's a completely mesmerizing paysage, absolutely gorgeous. What would you compare the actual nature? How does it look like? Like, it does look like Mars to me.
It looks like, well, there are some mountains. So it's a Ural Ridge, goes from the Northern Ocean up to the Kazakhstan for 3,000 kilometers. So in polar area, this sort of hills and small mountains not higher than 1,000 meters. And then it steeply goes down up to Tundra. Tundra is absolutely flat area with small rivers and swampy, and once again swampy areas. So you can't walk on around this area. So it's impossible in summertime with millions and millions of mosquitoes all around. So on one hand, you could say that it's this land of death. For local people, it's a promised land, because this is the best land for reindeers.
Thank you so much, Dmitry. We will post the information about your trip in our Moscow Travel Club. We will. Enjoy Crimea. Enjoy Crimea and stay with us if you want. And yeah,
I have to go. We're still in Crimea. We still keep on going, keep on traveling.
Thank you. Glad to see you. Bye.
Bye. See ya.
Yes, and now we are going to speak about Moscow. Welcome to Moscow.
Yes, welcome to Moscow. I myself am in Moscow. I've been in Moscow for many years now, and I'm going to show you a little bit about Moscow. Let me just share my screen. I have lived, actually, before I came to Moscow, in 7 countries, and I've traveled extensively. It used to be my profession for a while. And I have to tell you that after all of this, this is my favorite place. So this presentation, even if it's really relatively short in terms of what Moscow has to offer, it's also a declaration of love. And I really recommend you to visit the city and also Russia beyond it if you can. I personally think that Moscow is the most fascinating city in the world. So I'm going to try and be quick, but there's a lot of information, and I have to tell you, maybe it's my enthusiasm, but I already shortened it quite a lot. So the idea here is actually not to show you everything or even most things, but to give you a feeling for the city, and to give you a sort of resource to make you curious in order to visit. And so also there are going to be some links that will be coming in this presentation and also in the slide comments, which I will send to you after the presentation. So if you decide that you would like to visit or find out more, you can explore that. I would just give you a very brief sort of overview of the history, or not the history, but just some data really quickly on Moscow as a city. It was founded in 1147, so it's 874 years old. It was founded by Yuri Dolgoruki, who is a Rurikid prince. There were 2 dynasties of Russian Tsars, and the Rurikid were the first. They were of Viking descent, and actually Moscow was the capital of Russia from 1478 until 1712, when the capital moved to St. Petersburg under Peter the Great, and then it became the capital again after the revolution in 1918. It has a population officially right now of 12.7 million, which is, just to give you an idea of scale, 1.5 times the size of New York City. I suspect that it has a larger population unofficially. It has a surface area of almost 2,600 square kilometers, which is also, for scale, twice the size of New York. We have a huge temperature range from -42 degrees Celsius to +38. So you can see it's extreme continental. And Maria also showed you already sort of an overview of the main nationalities and ethnicities. Of course, Russians are in the minority with over 90%. We have a lot of Ukrainians, Tatars, Armenians, Azeris, Jews, but also many people from Central Asia who don't come up in the statistics because supposedly they're not very numerous. However, I suspect that their numbers are larger than officially stated: Kyrgyz, Kazakh, Uzbeks, and Georgians. And any religion you can imagine is present. Obviously, mostly Orthodox Christianity, also Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, and many others. The best time to visit, I personally would say, is May to October, but that's in terms of if you want to be wandering outside and see as much as you can. However, I would say that it's interesting in winter as well. We have 3 UNESCO sites in Moscow, and I'm going to tell you about 2 of them, one being the Kremlin at Red Square, and another one being the Novidivici Convent. And a third one, which I won't have time to tell you about in detail, but I will mention, is Kolomenskaya Park. So what are we going to be talking about? I'm going to tell you about some sites, some theaters, restaurants, museums, transportation, and shopping. It sounds like the regular sort of tourist mix, but I hope in the scope of this to give you, like I said, some resources and also specifically a feeling for the atmosphere and the energy in this very special city. You can see on the right-hand side a map, and maybe you can sort of discern there that there are 3 rings in which the city is organized. The central one is the Garden Ring, which is sort of circumscribed by the train stations in blue, and that's downtown. And the second one, the Transport Ring, and the third one, which sort of separates the city from the region lying beyond that. Of course, probably the most well-known site, which has to be mentioned for the sake of completeness, is Red Square, which is a UNESCO site. And it's one of the most famous architectural complexes in the world. It's rather large, 27,000 square meters. this first thing that you will hear if you visit Red Square, but it's really worth noting, is that actually the name does not come from the word red, okay, krasny. It actually comes from the historical meaning for beautiful, because red was associated with beauty, with red cheeks, with blooming youth. And this used to be a marketplace, which has been used since then for various purposes, for parades. Now it's used for concerts and all kinds of events. In winters, you can ice skate there. There are obviously some very famous buildings here. You can see on the slide St. Basil's Cathedral with the onion domes, which was built by Ivan the Terrible to commemorate the victory over the Tatar hordes. There's also the famous State Department Store, Gom, the Historical Museum, the Lenin Mausoleum, the Kazan Cathedral, and of course the Kremlin, which I will tell you about a little bit more in a moment. To the north, we have Tversky Boulevard, which is comparable to the Champs-Élysées in Paris or New York's Fifth Avenue. To the northwest, we have a huge garden, Alexandrovsky Sad. We have Manezhnaya Square, which used to be stables. Now it's an exhibit center, and the Bolshoi Theater to the northeast. To the west, we have the Kremlin. To the south, the Moscow River. And then Zamoskvorechi, which is an area where Tatars and merchants used to live. And to the east, we have a park, rather new, called Zaradya and Kitai Gorod, which are the remains of the medieval ramparts of the city built in the 16th century. This is the Gom Department Store, which you can see by the facade is quite an unusual and beautiful historical architectural monument built in 1893. Actually, it was begun earlier by Catherine the Great in Russian style, which combines traditional elements with Byzantine influences. And in fact, inside, in terms of shopping, there's not so much that's exciting there today. It's mostly international designers, but there is one exception which I would like to mention. It's a Russian sports and luxury brand, which is called Bosco. And Bosco is in fact also the main shareholder and tenant of the building complex, who also is the tenant who's renting the building essentially for everyone. One thing which might be worth mentioning for you in terms of the current context is that you can get free COVID vaccines in the Gom Department Store, Sputnik V, and you don't actually need any appointment at all. You can just come while you wait and immediately get access. There are 2 of them, so you do need to have 2 to 3, I think it's 3 weeks actually in between them. And if you do that, you will get a certificate the second time, which documents the fact that you got the vaccine. There's also some interesting opportunities in this department store. There's a very fun restaurant, which is called Stolovia 57. I'll tell you about that when I come to the restaurants. And I would recommend, if you want to see this as a sort of tourist attraction, to visit the food department, because they have some great delicacies there. Not only caviar, of course, but also Russian wines, which can be quite good. And caviar, I should mention, don't be surprised, it's going to be red caviar most of the time, because the black caviar is actually listed as an endangered species. So obviously you need to know about the Kremlin. This is a UNESCO site as well since 1990. The Kremlin, you might know, means fortress, okay? So there are several Kremlins in Russia. In fact, there are even several Kremlins in Moscow. But this is the Kremlin that is, of course, the famous Kremlin, which is the seat of the government. The area that it is built on has been populated since the 2nd century before Christ. Originally, of course, the Kremlin as a fortification was built in wood. It's been burnt down several times during the course of history through Tatar invasions, etc. It's a huge architectural complex. It's almost 280,000 square meters. As you probably know, it's the official residence of the president. It used to be the residence historically during the Soviet times of the General Secretary of the Communist Party. And it was, of course, the residence of the Russian Tsars before the revolution. The main building that you see on the right-hand side is the Grand Kremlin Palace, which was built in 1849 by a very famous architect by the name of Ton, who also built the Cathedral of Christ the Savior, which has since been reconstructed and which I will tell you about. The Kremlin is not just the seat of government, it's also a collection of a large number of museums. There are 7 of them, and many churches. And the churches also are the burial place of metropolitans and patriarchs of the Russian Orthodox Church, of Grand Princes of Muscovy, and of the Russian Tsars. And there are exhibits there, such as the Armory Chamber, so museums you can actually visit. There is a display of the Russian state regalia, the famous Diamond Fund, some spectacular items there, and of course, regularly changing exhibits with some very interesting topics like space motifs in the graphic works of a Russian designer named Nadia Leger, who is actually studied in Paris and who combined these space motifs in her graphic works and jewelry. So something else I want to mention, and by the way, you can see this in the first image here with the Kremlin, is that this is on the embankment. And in fact, Moscow is famous for its embankments. There are many of them. This is one of them. And this is one that's very noticeable because it's Prechistynskaya embankment, because it's close to the Kremlin. So you can, if you're looking at that, you can wander a little bit further down and you will see this embankment. And you will see, among other things, the Cathedral of Christ the Savior, which I'm showing you here on this slide. This is something which is definitely worth seeing. Like I mentioned, it was designed originally by the same architect who did the Kremlin Grand Palace, but it was destroyed in 1932 by Stalin in order to make way for the Palace of the Soviets, which was planned, but was never built because of the Nazi invasion, which came in 1941. And as a consequence, this cathedral was rebuilt after the end of the Soviet Union during the time of the Moscow mayor Lushkov. And it was built under the direction of a rather famous artist and sculptor named Zurab Tsereteli, who is of Georgian origin and who is also the president of the Russian Academy of Arts. Just to give you an orientation, if you look to the southwest of this church, there is a bridge, which you can see here on the right-hand side, and it crosses over to a peninsula, which actually also shows Tsereteli's sculpture of Peter the Great. And there are some other interesting sites there, such as a chocolate factory by the name of Krasny Oktyabr, which has a nice cafe, and you can see a museum there. And if you cross the bridge further on, heading south, you will come to that region which I mentioned, Zamoskvorechye, and there's the first Tretyakovskaya gallery, which Maria has mentioned. And if you continue walking there, and you're going to be heading a little bit more in the direction of the west, you're going southwest, you're going to come to the second Tretyakovskaya Gallery and Gorky Park, as it used to be called. It's now called Culture Park or Park Kulture. And this is another embankment, which I want to tell you a little bit about. It's called Kotelnicheskaya embankment. And as you can see, it's dominated by this one very special building, just also for orientation. This is rather close to the Kremlin. If you keep walking towards the east, you're going to come to this embankment. And this building here, which is quite famous, it's called the House on the Embankment, that's its nickname. It's one of the so-called Seven Sisters, which are 7 high-rise buildings that were built under Stalin's direction as part of his new vision of Moscow. Again, this whole complex was not completely completed because, as you recall, the Palace of the Soviets was part of it, was intended, and was never built. However, this particular building is very, very high. It's 176 meters, which makes it the tallest, well, it was the tallest building in Europe at the time it was built. It has 32 floors. There are many famous people who lived here, and some of them still do: actors, singers, writers, poets, ballerinas, composers, and even Stalin's security chief, Beria, at the time. I'd like to mention that in the left-hand wing, in the western wing, there's a famous theater which is called Illusion. It doesn't perform all the time, but if you look it up, you can check when they have showings, and it's really worth a visit because it's quite atmospheric. Another embankment is this one, which is the Taras Shevchenko embankment, named after the famous Ukrainian poet. And appropriately, on the left-hand side, you can see another one of those Stalinist high-rises, which is originally called Hotel Ukraine, because again, this is the embankment Taras Shevchenko. This is another one of those Seven Sisters, as I said. It was always a hotel. Again, it used to be Hotel Ukraine. Now it's run by Radisson. Originally, it had over 1,000 rooms. Many of them have been closed now, but still about half of them are in use. It is the tallest hotel in Europe and the second tallest of the Seven Sisters. It stands at 198 meters with 34 levels. The tallest of the Seven Sisters, by the way, if you would like to visit that, is the Moscow State University at 240 meters. You have an excellent view of the city if you go to the very top, and you have a great opportunity to do that because the photograph on the right-hand side shows you something which is called the Mercedes Bar, which I very much recommend to you. It's a very pleasant bar on the rooftop where you can have a Moscow Mule cocktail, if you like that. It's quite delicious, vodka, ginger beer, and lime juice. And Radisson also offers river tours that you can freely book whether or not you're actually staying at the hotel. They leave from the embankment below the hotel. Yet another embankment, but actually, well, close to the embankment, better said, and the other bend of the river is the location of Novidivici Convent. And this is in fact also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is in fact very close to where I live, near the Luzhniki Stadium, which is where part of the Football World Championship happened a few years ago. And as such, there's a big park there, so it's a great place for a walk if you want to see the convent and take a walk and explore the area afterwards. There are two things which are worth seeing here. One is the convent itself, and another one is a historical cemetery. I'll tell you about that in a moment. The convent was built in the 16th century in Moscow Baroque style by the Prince of Muscovy, Vasily III, in the honor of his conquest of Smolensk and in honor of an icon which was located there, Our Lady of Smolensk, who is considered to be a patron, a protectress of the western borders of Russia. Also, this convent has quite a history behind it and is well known for having been the prison of Peter the Great's half-sister, Tsarina Sofia Alexeyevna, who was ousted from rule after she actually was acting as ruler of Russia during the period of the minority of her brother, Peter the Great. The cemetery, which I mentioned, is very interesting, and that's not to be gruesome. It's very beautiful. It's got huge and very ornate mausoleums and graves, which really are artworks just in themselves. But also there are 4 Tsarinas who are buried there, and the daughter of Ivan the Terrible. And besides that, there are some very famous people. I think a lot of you will know the names: Nikolai Gogol, Anton Chekhov, the poet Vladimir Mayakovsky, the feminist Alexandra Kollontai, Stalin's wife Nadezhda Alliluyeva, the first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, and the former president of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, his wife Raisa Gorbachev is buried here, and also President Yeltsin. So a lot of historical people and stories behind it. And very close to this convent, on the other side, you can't see it actually on the slide here, but if you would imagine looking down, there's a pond. And next to the pond, on the left-hand side, there is across the street a very pleasant restaurant, Georgian restaurant, which is called U Pirosmani, named after a famous Georgian painter. And it's very popular with heads of state. Bill Clinton has visited it, as has Germany's former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder. It has live music and a very nice sunroom and veranda. I very much would recommend that if you visit this convent, you also go there and try it. So let me also show you here something which is called VDNH, or if we translated, the exhibition of the achievements of the national economy. You can tell probably from the name that this is sort of dated with a particular historical context. Actually, it dates all the way back to 1935, but it was rebuilt during the Stalinist era and reflects that style, as does the name. It originally was conceived because it was in the trend of the times. At that time, around, well, 2 years later, 1937, the Paris World Fair took place. And in fact, in that connection, well, obviously Russia had a pavilion there, and it also had a very famous symbol of its exhibit, which was a statue by a sculptress named Vera Mukhina, and it's called The Worker and the Colchos Woman. I will show you that in the next slide. You can see it here depicted in bronze. I want to tell you a little bit more about this slide. This name, as it suggests, it reflects the achievements of the Soviet economy, and that's especially focusing on agriculture. So logically, this complex consists of a series of pavilions which represent the various different former Soviet republics. So you have, let me just maybe go to the next slide. You have buildings which represent, for example, Uzbekistan, Armenia, Karelia, etc. And at the time when the exhibit was originally active in its historical context, there were specialties from those various republics and regions. At this point, or I should say up until a few years ago, you had a random collection of shops here, also restaurants and kiosks with some quite interesting actually products, such as a lot of handicrafts, handmade jewelry, amber, silver. But it has now changed hands, and a lot of those stores have disappeared. However, you can still find some interesting places. If you go to the Armenian Pavilion, you'll find some nice cafes, restaurants, some silver jewelry, Armenian cognac. If you go to the Kyrgyz Pavilion, you'll find also felt specialties, jewelry, slippers, handbags, things like this. And if I go back to the previous slide, you can see here the expanse is quite large. You can have a walk there, you can go rollerblading, you can have ice cream, sit outside, have a coffee, go people watching, and visit the nearby Cosmonautics Museum. So another thing in terms of seeing a complex like this, where there is also some interesting shopping, is the market, the Vernissage in Ismailavo. And this is actually a market complex that was built on a territory which is much older, the Ismailavo Estate, which was built originally in 1609 by Dmitry Shuisky, who was a Rurikid descendant of the Rurikid dynasty. And later on, it was used by various generations of the Romanov dynasty as a fortified residence, including Peter the Great. And in fact, there's a legend that Peter the Great was born there. Nobody actually knows where he was born, so this is speculation. Also, Catherine the Great used it, as did Alexander I and Nikolai I. And some of the buildings which you see which you see especially in the area of the market of the Vernissage were built quite a bit later, actually as late as 2010. Right now, it's a market which is something like a combination between a flea market, souvenirs, and memorabilia. And you can see here some of the things that you can get there. So there are, let's say, carpets from the North Caucasus, from Dagestan, from Armenia, from Azerbaijan. There's some artwork, there's numismatics, you can collect stamps. There's all kinds of, let's say, how do you call it? Enamel work, some very interesting woodwork with paintings, some nice jewelry, a lot of collectibles, which I think could be interesting for you. And this is something which might seem unusual to talk about in connection with sort of tourism, but nonetheless, it's a wonderful and historical place. This is a swimming pool called Troika. And this is in fact a historical swimming pool, which originally was built in 1957 on the occasion of the World Festival of Youth and Students. And it's located close to the former Gorky Park or Cultural Park. So if you visit that, you can take a look at this. It was later used by the Russian national swimming team for training, and among its alumni, it has a Olympic champion in diving, Mr. Vasily. So it was also renovated in the honor of the 1980s Moscow Olympics. It's open all year round, although I think in wintertime, mostly for special events, not for everyone. But you can do a lot of interesting things here that go beyond a regular pool. You can get personal trainers. You can have regular group classes, including everything from Zumba dance in the water and water yoga to all kinds of gymnastics, scuba diving, and group water sports. They also have another extension of the complex, which is not just the pool, so you can do weight training there, tennis, and there's a very nice rooftop terrace where you can sit in the summertime. So it has a very special atmosphere, and I recommend this to you. Again, since our topic is Russia's the country of contexts, this is very much true of Moscow. As you can see from what I've shown you until now, Moscow has many faces. And Moscow City is, in fact, the ultra-modern face of the city. It's a complex of skyscrapers, which are used mostly for business, but there are also some leisure activities going on here. And it's located on the Presnensky Embankment. So it's also on the embankment, and unfortunately not visible on the slide, but if you look on the upper right-hand side, you can see a little bit of bend of the river there. It's quite important financial center and a world-renowned trade and expo center. And the tallest building here, if you're looking for that, is the Federation Tower East, which stands at 374 meters and has 94 floors. It's the second tallest building in Europe, the first tallest being the Lachta Center in St. Petersburg, which is 462.5 meters. If you would like to get a bird's eye view of the city, you have the option of going either to the Moscow City Museum, which is not quite the highest, but nonetheless a nice view at 215 meters. You can see the history of this complex and all kinds of lectures on architecture with a huge range of styles from the pre-revolutionary era through the Soviet times up until now. And also, I would recommend to you, if you look on the slide on the lower right-hand side, there is a restaurant called Ruski, which is the highest restaurant in Europe at 354 meters. And it is, in fact, in the Oko Tower on the 85th floor. It offers Russian cuisine and obviously really quite a spectacular view. Now, again, this might be something of a cliche, but nonetheless, no introduction to Russia or Moscow would be complete without telling you about the sauna culture or the Russian banya. And this is true also of Moscow. I would say that, well, before I tell you about some details, let me tell you something in general. There's a good reason why saunas are famous in Russia. Of course, it's partially because of the climate, and especially it's very beneficial in the cold weather. People like to use traditionally something called a venik, which you can see here on the picture. It's either an oak or birch broom, which is used to distribute water and steam. And today, usually these complexes will offer you a whole range of services beyond the actual sauna, such as all kinds of spa treatments and beauty services like hairdressers. And always, always you will have a nice restaurant attached because of course people spend the whole day here and they want to have something good to eat. And so you can see here in this particular example, this is one of the two banya that I want to stress in Moscow. It's called Vorontsovskaya banya. It's got, like I said, a very wide range in its menu in the restaurant, but the more historical banya in Moscow, because this one is actually from 1938, the more historical one dates to 1808, and that's the Sandanovskaya baths, which are really historically very famous. Not only is it built in this gorgeous building that you can see here, which combines a whole range of styles, Baroque, Rococo, Renaissance, Gothic, and classical. and is very richly decorated with marble from all over Europe, including from Italy and from Norway. But they offer excursions. So if you don't want to actually go to the baths as such, you can simply have an excursion and get a tour of this great architecture. I should tell you, however, that this has a whole history behind it, and it's probably the most famous and popular baths in Moscow historically. It used to be frequented by Chekhov, by Leo Tolstoy, by Sergei Eisenstein, the famous director, by the composer Rachmaninoff, by the Romanov family. And it has been featured in a lot of culture, such as, for example, in a very famous connection of essays called Moscow and the Muscovites by a gentleman named Giliarovsky. And I would like to just read to you a very short paragraph that he wrote about this. Moscow poured into the baths, especially into the male and female noble department, arranged with conveniences unheard of in Moscow before, with a dressing room mirrored, with clean sheets on soft sofas, well-trained servants, experienced bath attendants and bathhouse attendants. The dressing room became a club where the most diverse society met. Everyone found here his circle of acquaintances. And moreover, a buffet with all kinds of drinks, from kvass to champagne, moët, and I. Both Griboyedov's and Pushkin's Moscow, the one that met in the saloon of Zinaida Volkhonskaya and in the English club, stayed in these baths. And I'm adding the links to these locations in the presentation so that you can use that as a resource if you would like to have a look. And I just want to show you the interior of these baths. You can see really a very eclectic mixture of styles, and it really is very intriguing and appealing. I'd like to recommend to you to do Moscow at least partially on foot if you have the time and if you come at the right time of year. And specifically, one historical walk that I would recommend to you is from, well, I'm sketching here the streets, from Myasnitskaya to Kuznetsky Most, and then to Kamergersky Lane. And let me tell you how this works. So if you look in the upper left-hand side of the slide, this is Myasnitskaya Ulitsa or Myasnitskaya Street number 19. It's going to be, you're going to be looking down the hill because it's on a hilltop and descending the hill towards the city center. This building is a famous store. It's called Tea and Coffee, and it's a little bit hard to see on the slide, but it's built in chinoiserie style, in Chinese style. And in fact, it really has a lot of elements that were imported from China. It was built in 1893 for a trader family called Perlov. And this family has actually single-handedly, 100 years before even the building was built, it single-handedly introduced tea to Russian culture, popularized tea, not only in Moscow, but across the country. Well, of course, tea was present before, but this merchant family made it really, really famous by importing a lot directly from China. And in connection with that story, they built this building with this Chinese facade in order to advertise, and it was a huge hit. It only added to their renown and to the fame of their products. And you can see in the second picture here on the slide, below the facade, what it looks like inside with the whole array of tea. If you keep going down the hill further on, you're going to see on the right-hand side, and unfortunately it's not on the slide because there's too many things to show you on the slide, but the HSE, or the Higher School of Economics, which is one of the best and most famous educational institutions offering world-class degree programs. If you continue yet further on, a little bit further down on the left-hand side, across from that Higher School of Economics, you can see it on the slide here in the left-hand corner, it's Biblioglobus, which was built, well, actually the store opened in 1957, but the building was built in the 18th century. And it's one of the largest bookstores. It has 3 levels, and it offers practically every book in Russian that you can imagine. But not only that, it also has an antiquarian section, and you can collect coins and stamps here. It's also in the world record book for, or at least the Russian book of records for selling the most retail publications on one day, because it's so popular and has such a wide selection. If you keep going down the street, Masnitskaya Ulica, you'll come to Lubyanka Square, Lubyanskaya Ploshchad. And if you cross the street and then you turn right, you're going to come to eventually Kuznetsky Most pedestrian zone, which, let me see, you can see here on the upper right-hand corner. And there are several sites there that I want to draw your attention to. If you keep going down, you're going to come to Tsum, which is a central universal department store on the left-hand side. And crossing Petrovka Street, you're going to actually, if you go in, take a turn to the left, you're going to come to the Bolshoi Theater. However, instead of turning left, if you keep going straight, you're going to come to Kamargirsky Lane, which is a continuation of that pedestrian zone, which is a wonderful place with a lot of outdoor cafes in summer. And it will take you straight to Tverskaya Ulica, which is, again, the main street in Moscow, comparable to New York's Fifth Avenue. So a very nice walk that I really would recommend. Just a few theaters I would like to draw your attention to, because in fact there are 200 theaters in Moscow, so obviously we can't talk about all of them. But something that I should stress is that theaters in general and culture overall are very, very popular in Russia, and especially in Moscow with its tradition. I should say that theaters draw bigger crowds than other mass events in other places usually. So if you want to book, if you want to see something in a theater, you have to book in advance. Otherwise, you won't have a chance of getting a ticket because the demand is really, really big. Another thing to take note of is that if you go to the theater, you're going to want to dress up. It's considered to be a big occasion. People really enjoy it. It's a festive event and they get very fancy, so it's a lot of fun. There are several theaters here on the slide that you can find also in the notes with some links. Notable ones are the Miakovsky Theater, the Moscow Academic Art Theater named after Gorky, the Moscow Theater, a School of Modern Drama, the Pushkin Theater, the Electra Theater Stanislavski, who developed his own style of theater, which is very interesting, and the Mossoviet State Academic Theater. All of these are worthwhile. They are very disparate. They show a huge range of material and dramaturgs, including everything from pre-revolutionary to Soviet and contemporary Moscow life. So it's something that you definitely will want to take in a whole range of if you have the time to do that. Now, I realize that if you go to Moscow, you're not going there primarily to go to the cinema, but nonetheless, there are some things which really you should know. And I want to mention just two cinema theaters, which really are quite unusual. First of all is the Art Movie Theater you can see on the left-hand side here. Художественный, it's the oldest cinema in Moscow. It goes back to 1909, so it was built during the time of the Tsars, before the revolution. In fact, it's one of the oldest cinemas in the world, and it was originally built as such. There were a few buildings that were built and still are standing today originally as cinemas, so this is one of them. And it held a capacity of 400 people at the time it was constructed, which was phenomenal. It's one of the few cinemas still surviving today, which is over 100 years old. And on the right-hand side here, you can see the Pioneer Cinema, Summer Cinema in Gorky Park, which I really recommend to you if you come to Moscow in the summertime, because it's very pleasant to visit the park and then go there as the conclusion to your evening, especially if you would like to go to a restaurant. There are many restaurants in the park, and visit the theater afterwards. However, if you want to visit a restaurant, the same thing holds as with the theaters. You should try and book in advance if that's possible, or be ready to wait for a table. If you don't feel like doing that, or that's not possible, then you can definitely also have a snack outside this theater cinema before you go in. You can get a good hot dog and beer outside in the kiosk. And this, in fact, brings me to the next topic, which really is important, which is food. And that's so important, in fact, that I've dedicated 4 slides to it, but don't despair, I'm going to try and be relatively quick with them. So the first thing I want to do is show you the huge array of food that you can expect, not only in Moscow, but in Russia generally, but of course in Moscow as a concentrated cultural metropolis. Now, here you can see specifically Russian, Georgian, Ukrainian, Armenian, and Uzbek specialties. And let me just maybe mention very briefly something about them. So on the right-hand side, you can see some barbecue meat from the mangal, which is a specialty way of preparing it, which is actually famous in the Caucasus and Central Asian areas. It's also popular well, there are other types of barbecue like shashlik, like the sort of more Turkic influences. On the left-hand upper corner, you can see some Georgian specialties. There's a whole array of things which are worth trying. There's a lot of garlic, there's a lot of spices, onions, stuffed breads with cheese. On the lower left-hand side, you can see Uzbek plov, which is rice with meat. In the lower central picture, you can see a very wonderful Slavic Jewish specialty, which is farshmak. It's herring, pickled herring with onions and pickles, and it's rather spicy, but extremely delicious. If you want to kiss someone afterwards, you better be sure that they eat the same thing. On the right-hand side, also a mixture. You can see plov that is being prepared. You can see some Georgian dumplings, hinkali, and on the lower right-hand side, some sweet dumplings filled with cherries. So you can see that I'm getting inspired just telling you about this. And of course, you can get all kinds of other international cuisine in Moscow and in Russia, such as Turkish, Indian, Chinese, lots of Korean, Italian, Japanese, especially sushi. And if you click on the links that I'm giving the photo credits for, you'll also see the addresses of some of the restaurants, but they're also in the slides, in the slide comments. So you'll have a whole array of resources here. I want to show you some of the kinds of atmospheres, styles you can find in terms of restaurants. These are just a few selected examples because there are an unending array of both cuisine and atmosphere for every occasion, restaurants at every turn, but some that I think are definitely worth visiting. The first one, starting on the upper left-hand side, is the Stolovia 57 that I mentioned in the Gom Department Store on Red Square. Their motto is you can get food like in the Soviet cafeteria, which maybe doesn't sound appealing to you immediately, but I can tell you that it's really, really good. The second picture on the right is, after that, is the restaurant Zhivago, which has wonderful breakfasts. And as you can see, the historical museum, it's got a great view of Red Square coming from the northern side. So you see the historical museum from that angle. On the right of that, Cafe Pushkin, which looks like a time machine in a wonderful historical building, Russian cuisine. Then on the right, one of the many restaurant yachts. This one is called Lastishka. It's actually stationary, but you can sit outside on the water. Then going down to the second row, lower left-hand corner, Kazbek is a wonderful Georgian restaurant with a rooftop veranda, which is something you just absolutely have to see. It's an experience in itself. Also wonderful food, Garinich in the middle, which has its own bakery, a huge grill, all kinds of delicious specialties, also a wide array. They even have gluten-free bread if you want to try that, and a very unique atmosphere, really like the fairy tale that it's named after. On the right-hand side, you can see here that restaurant that I mentioned, Upirosmani, which is across from the Novidivici Convent, and that has got a very nice veranda. So food markets and food malls are also quite popular in Moscow, and there are many of them. Practically, actually every district has them. But I would like to mention just a few selected ones which I think are among the most interesting. On the upper right-hand side, this one is called Vakruk Sveta, which means around the world. And as the name suggests, you have cuisine from all over the world here, from both Russia and neighboring republics, and also beyond the former Soviet geographies. But something I would love to recommend to you, some of the highlights are the Vietnamese pho soups, anything that's Italian there, Uzbek sweets, and Uzbek Eastern style coffee, Turkish coffee. On the lower right-hand side, the Depot, which is in fact the largest food mall in Europe. And it's an historical factory building, which has a very unique atmosphere. It's got a huge array to choose from. Some very good Chinese, Indian, and Azeri food. And surprisingly, I found one of the best South Indian masala dosas that I found outside of India. But be warned that one is enough for 4 people. On the upper left-hand side, you can see the Usachevsky market, which is right next door to me in the Khamovnitsky district in a river bend, between the river bends. And this has, as you can see on the slide, especially strong a selection of fruits and vegetables, which actually all of these markets usually have. But especially, but besides that, you've got also things like artisan cheeses, honey, local honey from Russia, from the region, smoked fish, all kinds of bakeries, including Georgian Specialties. And one of my favorite bakeries, which is gluten-free, which is called Leoni Grechka. It's linseed and buckwheat bread. There's a vegan store there. There's a wine and beer store with specialties from all over the world, including Chinese beer, all kinds of restaurants, Georgian, Korean, Italian. And in summer, you can sit outside on the terraces, which are multiple because it's very popular. So you've got them street level, second level, and rooftop. And it's open until late in the evening. So if at the end of the day after sightseeing, you're interested in doing that, you can also take a look. For convenience, if you don't have time, but you don't want junk food, you can get classical food fast. And again, I'm offering some links here. If you click on the photographs in the slides, or also look at the links in the notes to the slide comments, you're going to find the websites of these chains. Some of them are Russian, some of them are foreign. Coffee Mania is, of course, a European brand, a European style coffee house. I recommend to you for atmosphere the particular address that I'm sending you the link of, which is the Grand Cafe, very interesting atmosphere. Then Grabli, which is Russian multicultural mixed. It's in a buffet style, self-serve, very pleasant atmosphere, very delicious array of food. Something for everyone to choose from. Mumu, which is also a wide array of choice, mostly Russian, but also with popular modern things like pizza and shashlik. And on the right-hand side, the chaykhana, which you can get Uzbek specialties, like I mentioned, the pilau, the plov. And then if we look in the second level, second row, Khlyeb Nasushny, which is also known under the title of this Belgian chain, Le Pain Quotidien, which is, of course, a European coffee house, but a very nice, pleasant atmosphere, all in wood. Then a wonderful Ukrainian chain called Odessa Mama, which is Ukrainian Jewish, absolutely delicious. And if you come during season when they are offering specialties with chanterelle mushrooms, I absolutely recommend it to you. You can tell now that I'm a foodie, right? To the right of that, another Ukrainian restaurant called Taras Bulba, which is named after the famous novel by Gogol about a Cossack of the same name. It's a wonderful but heavy Ukrainian restaurant, heavy cuisine. So especially good at the cold time of the year. However, also a huge array of choice, so you can choose. And finally, on the right-hand side, right-hand lower corner, there is a chain which is called Kulinarnaya Lavka Bratiev Karavaevых, which is a also sort of buffet type of choice of Russian and Soviet salads with a wide array of sweets, very delicious sweets, and it's a buffet which you can choose from. And finally, since I did tell you I have 4 slides, which
I am going to share a song, because I know if you know that yesterday was Eurovision. Okay, I know that the winner is Italy, and we want to share the song of Russia that went to Eurovision, the time that she's coming, okay? Don't worry. Okay, here from Russia. Enjoy it.
поле, я жмала. Поле, 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 так мало. Как пройти по полю из огня? Как пройти по полю, если ты одна? Штаничек, ручечки, ручки. А кто подаст мне ручку, девочки? Испокон веков, с ночи до утра, с ночи ночи ждем мы корабля, очень-очень ждем мы корабля, ждем мы корабля, ждем мы корабля. А чё ждать? Встала и пошла. Every Russian woman needs to know you're strong enough to bounce against the wall. Every Russian woman needs to know you're strong enough to bounce against the wall. Что там хорохорится? Ой, красавица, ждешь своего юнца. Ой, красавица, тебе уж за 30. Алло, где же дети? Ты в целом красива, но вот похудеть бы. Надень подлиннее, надень покороче. Расслабь без отца, делай то, что не хочешь. Ты точно не хочешь? Не хочешь? Послушайте, правда, мы с вами не стадо вороны. Прошу, отвалите. Теперь зарубите себе на носу. Я вас не виню, а себя я чертовски люблю. Борются, борются, все по кругу борются, да не молятся. Сын без отца, дочь без отца, но сломанной фэмили не сломать меня. Every Russian woman needs to know you're strong enough to rise against the wall. Every Russian woman needs to know you're strong enough. Эй, русские женщины, давай голосуй за меня. Да, you're strong enough. You're strong enough. Don't be afraid. 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 Борются, все по кругу борются, да не молятся. Сын без отца, дочь без отца, но в сломанной фэмили не сломать меня.
So I think I'm not going to go back into the presentation at this point because there are only a few slides left anyway, and we're going to send that to you all afterwards so that you'll have the resources. But just to let you know, there would have been music and dining with a lot of jazz clubs. I personally love jazz. Some of the main museums, transportation, which is not just a practical thing, but it's a work of art, because I would be have shown you the Moscow Metro, which is actually very similar to opera houses, I would say, from the way it looks, and also some interesting possibilities to get ideas for souvenirs. All of the links again are in there, and also I would give you my contact and say that if anyone is inspired to visit Moscow and Russia, then I have achieved my purpose, and I'm very happy to answer questions if you want to ask me either now or later on.
In our group, and he's a space engineer, and he'll be presenting us. Oh, look how cool. Yeah, he's gonna be talking about just a short presentation about the Russian. Alev, you can tell us more.
Yeah, there we go. Привет, everybody from the International Space Station. So Russia is not only represented on Earth, but it is the country with the highest number of citizens in space, living continuously in space. Now there are currently 3 Russians in the next capsules. So I will tell you a little bit about the Russian space industry, the leading space industries in the world, as a space engineer myself. So Russia is one of the 3 nations which has the capability to send human to space, one of the 3 nations in the world. And this has been the very first in many waste in the space industry. So don't bother the American flag and the NASA. I'm just a Russian spy pretending to be American. Okay, so Russia was #1 in multiple things within the space industry. So they have sent the first satellite, which is called Sputnik in 1957. Does the name Sputnik remind you something? Connected to Corona? So
The vaccine.
Yeah. Exactly. So actually, Sputnik means satellite in Russian, and they were the first nation to send a satellite, which is literally a bit bigger than a basketball. I've seen the real size. It's not a big thing, which just makes beep beep beep, but it was the very first man-made thing in space. And then just a month later, they sent the first living species, a dog called Laika, to space in order to test the chances of living species surviving the space environment. So majority of the space-related world knows the 12th of April as the Yuri's Night, for a very good reason, because they sent the very first person, Russia sent the very first person to space on 12th of April 1961. And now 12th of April is celebrated all over the world as Yuri's Night. If you haven't heard of it, feel free to Google it. And another very important time step in the space history is to send the first woman in space, Valentino Tereshkova. And this thing is around 12th of April. It should be 16th of June, 1962. And I want to point out that Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman, has been sent to space by the Russians just 1 year after they sent the first man to space. And just a comparison, I think Americans, if I'm not wrong, took 12 to 13 years to send the first American woman to space. So Russians are still leading even within this time frame. And so this is not the International Space Station where I'm right now. This is the Soyuz. Sorry, this is the Salyut space station, and Russians have another very important success in sending a space station, and it was the very first space station around the Earth, orbiting around the Earth, where people continuously lived. And additionally, another very important thing, which some of you might not know, is that the very first spacewalk to space was also done by the Russians. And it was done by Alexei Leonov. And for the ones who are not aware, is that spacewalk means that literally the astronaut is wearing a spacesuit, a bit more sophisticated than the one I'm wearing now, and they are moving outside the space station or a shuttle or whatever they are in, and they are free to go in space. So this is the very first spacesuit, which was literally used by Alexei Leonov in 1965. And with that, I would also like to present a few other very quick practicalities of the Russian way, because every country has their own ways. And I have to say that Russian space industry is probably the most pragmatic space industry on this planet. So they are very simplistic. So they want to simplify things and not complicate it. It might seem like it is not very human. It doesn't follow human comfort too much, but in the end, this lets you lead the way. One example. I'll give two examples. One example is Americans, because if you think of a pen, so it literally is not going to write when you go against gravity. Now I'm in the International Space Station. It's something else, but on Earth it's not. You cannot write like this. So you need gravity to have the ink coming down. And what the Americans did was, okay, we need a pen, and then they developed a pen with a special pressure so that it works in space. And the Russians were just using a pencil. So sometimes you don't need to explicitly develop something. But I'm going to tell you another example of the Russian simplification, and you decide which one you prefer. So many of you might not know that when you're an astronaut, this is for every astronaut, when you're an astronaut and you're sent to space, there is always the chance that you might end up in a situation where you are still alive, but you don't have the capability to come back to Earth, which literally means you would have to wait most of the times for your oxygen to finish. And dying out of carbon dioxide is quite painful. And in order to reduce the pain, Americans have prepared a pill which you can take whenever you can't bear the pain, and your heart and all your symptoms will stop, and you won't have any pain. And here comes the simplicity of the Russians. Instead of developing a pill which will help you like the Americans did, they just gave their let's say cosmonauts a gun, and they say shoot yourself. So I leave it up to you which one you might choose, but with this I would like to end this space part of the presentation, and very soon in a few minutes I'm going to share a space related present into the chat for everybody.
We're going to get ready for the Q&A now. So before we get started with the Q&A,